again. I'd just like to carry on from we just left off because it's a question regarding prayer and meditation, which is part of devotion and knowledge. In prayer, well, I'm sure that you know that some of us have been saying our daily prayers since childhood. And in prayer, I sometimes feel I'm the separate self addressing God or awareness or knowing as an object. Highly idealized, of course, but still separate. Now, should one stop saying the prayers one has been having this habit of saying every day? Or should one learn to let awareness seep into those very words that one has been saying? Or put otherwise, can awareness pray to itself? Or can it only be silent? That is, be in meditation.
What a beautifully formulated question. You're absolutely right that the penultimate prayer, in the penultimate prayer, the separate self directs its attention towards God, which is considered to be outside of and at an infinite distance from itself. So although in this kind of prayer the separate self is directing its longing towards God, its prayer depends upon its own existence. So in the ultimate analysis, this prayer reinforces the separate self. So in the ultimate, that's the penultimate prayer. But in the ultimate form of prayer, the very self that would pray to God has to dissolve in that to which it prays, or in that for which it longs. So the ultimate prayer is not a directing of the self towards God, but a sinking or dissolving of the self into God. So it is in other words, let me put it in another way. Our longing for God proceeds from ourself towards God, always towards an object. But in order to find what we are truly looking for, our longing has to subside or fall backwards into its source, rather than go outwards towards its object. The self has to recognize that what it seeks for at a distance from itself lies in the origin of itself. And those of you that come on my retreats have heard me say this so often, but I can't improve on it. The Italian monk describing the essence of prayer when he said, "Lord, thou art the love with which I love thee." He thought that he was loving, that with his own love, he was directing that love towards God. And then he realized that God is the very love which he was directing towards the object. So So what you are praying to lives at the origin of your prayer. It can never live at the destiny of your prayer. It's a sinking of your longing into its source, not a directing of your longing towards God. As Rumi said, in the existence of your love, I become non-existent. That's the ultimate prayer. So, your question, can awareness pray to itself? It's the same question that we discussed a few days ago. Can awareness direct its attention towards itself? No, it is too close to itself. Can the sun shine on itself? No, it's too close to itself. Awareness cannot direct its attention towards itself. God cannot pray to itself. The sun cannot shine on itself. So this is the higher meaning of the word prayer. In most cases, prayer is considered to be something that the separate self does, that the separate self directs its love towards God. It's not a directing of love towards God, it's a sinking backwards into that love.
So did your devotion then start as an outward flow?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it now, your devotion is an inward?
Yes, my devotion started with a conventional idea of God, and that I devoted myself to that God. But I always found the separate self remained intact, so I was frustrated. Although I couldn't formulate it at the time, I wanted to remain intact as a separate self and to know God. I, the separate self, wanted to know God. It's like a moth wanting to experience the flame. It's like the moth is attracted to the flame, but it wants to touch the flame so that it can experience it. But the moth can never experience the flame, because as soon as it touches the flame, it dies. So it was like that. I was like a moth to a flame. I wanted to experience, I, the separate self, wanted to know God. I wanted to fly into the flame and remain alive. It's not possible. So then I realized that what I was conceiving as God was in fact my very own self, but with a limit attached to it. So this limited self was trying to approach God, but God was shining at the heart of this limited self, but couldn't be clearly seen because of its limitations. And that's when it became clear that in order to know God, one cannot know God, one can only be the Absolute. The I has to either make an investigation called self-inquiry, or it has to surrender itself, which is the equivalent of self-inquiry on the path of devotion. It's either self-abidance or self-surrender. But what is being surrendered, in fact, are all the limitations that the self has acquired, leaving the absolute reality of the self shining, and that is what is called God's infinite being, or infinite consciousness. So the self cannot approach God because the self is already that for which it is longing. But it cannot know that because of its limitations. It's the beautiful thing Ramana Maharshi said, when the I, he means the separate self, when the I, no, sorry, let me give you the quote first. When the I is divested of the I, only I remains. When the separate self is divested from all its separate qualities, only I, the same self, the self that it always is, remains, but no longer colored by limitations. There is only one I, there is only one self, and that is God's self. The self of each of us is God's infinite being, only limited apparently by thoughts and feelings, which makes God's infinite being appear to be a separate self. That separate self cannot approach God, because that separate self is already the absolute, with a self-assumed limit attached to it. So all we can do is surrender those limits. In fact, we don't even need to surrender those limits. We just need to see that those limits don't apply to what we really are. So if we look at what we really are, if we realize I'm not limited by my thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, at some point this, what we really are, shines as it is. So the essence of prayer is not a movement of the self towards God, but a surrendering of the self into its essence.
So would it be fair to say that when you pray, you actually meditate, or?
Yes, prayer and meditation in the ultimate analysis are the same thing. The penultimate meditation is to direct one's attention towards an object, such as a mantra, a flame, the breath, a teacher, just as the penultimate prayer is to direct one's love towards God. So in these forms of meditation and prayer, they are different. And that is why the Christians argue with the Buddhists about the difference between prayer and meditation. It's because they're talking about these let's call them objective types of meditation and prayer. Meditation and prayer that require the directing of our attention or our longing towards some kind of object, however idealized, as you say. But in the highest forms of meditation and prayer, our attention and our longing are not directed outwards towards the object. They sink or flow backwards or inwards towards their source, and their source is the same. The source of attention and the source of longing is the same. We call the source of attention consciousness, and we call the source of longing love, but they're the same. Consciousness and love are the same. So yes, the essence of meditation and the essence of prayer are identical. The Christian mystics called the essence of prayer the practice of the presence of God. It wasn't to do with directing the longing towards God. It was the practice of the presence of God.